The New York Jets. The New York Jets, right? The Jets were supposed to finally put everything together in 2024 with a healthy Aaron Rodgers alongside a defense that, well, many considered one of the better units in the NFL. Okay? Instead, old man Rodgers and that offense were incredibly mediocre. Suppose defensive mastermind head coach Robert Saleh was fired early in October, and New York finished with a sub-500 season for an NFL high 9th consecutive year. Okay? This was anyone's idea of a bad football team. Okay? 24th in points per game. Points per game against was 20th. Now, Jets owner Woody Johnson went ahead and infiltrated the Lions coaching staff in an attempt to turn the ship really around. It remains to be seen just how qualified and ready to go a new head coach in Aaron Glenn is. A new offensive coordinator, Tanner Edstrand. I'm probably going to butcher that. Well, but hey, it can't get much more worse, right? We have to look at that. It can't get much more worse. This brings us to today's goal. Answer some key fantasy-related questions about the Jets, right? Okay. Let's get into it. Justin Fields. Is Justin Fields the late-round quarterback target this year? Okay. Over the past 3 seasons, there's actually been minimal turnover atop the fantasy points per dropback leaderboard. In fact, 4 quarterbacks have made the metrics top 5 in 3 consecutive seasons. Okay? Josh Allen, duh. Lamar Jackson, obviously. Jalen Hurts, makes sense. Justin freaking Fields. Guys, when this man is on the field, he's a fantasy cheat code. Now, this goodness from 2024 obviously only came across 6 starts. But for all the grief of that for Fields catching as a passer, we probably don't give him enough love for what he's capable of doing on the ground. Okay? After all, Fields did join Jackson and Jaden Daniels as the only quarterbacks in NFL history to average at least 50 rushing yards per game during their career. Now, this dual threat element has really helped Fields consistently rack up rather great numbers in fantasy land, even if his progression as a real-life passer hasn't exactly been awesome, right? This is Fields' fantasy points per game since 2022. 2022, he was QB5 at 19.7 points per game. The next year, he was quarterback 11 at 17.7 points per game. And then this last year, he moved back up to quarterback 8 at 18.9, okay? It remains to be seen if Fields will turn into, well, the first overly successful Jets quarterback since, I don't know, Chad Pennington. Are we calling that? Mark Sanchez? Are we doing that? Maybe Joe Namath? Right? Yikes. It really has been rough for the Jets. But I wouldn't count on Fields necessarily being confused with some of the league's more elite pure passers anytime soon. Okay? Have you seen this wide receiver room outside of Garrett Wilson? It's not pretty. Okay? Just realize Fields putting up quality numbers in fantasy lands would be par for the course considering how dominant high-volume dual-threat quarterbacks have been over the last 3 years. Fantasy, I was reading an article in the Fantasy Life Director of Analytics, and I can't say that word, analytics, Dwayne McFarland. Okay, love the guy, love his writing. He currently has Fields projected for 132 carries this season. Now, barring a complete faceplant collapse, that leads to a Tyrod Taylor maybe starting job because Fields can't get it done or an injury happens. It sure looks like Fields will have a tough time busting in fantasy football, okay? So what is our fantasy football outlook for Justin Fields in 2025? I have Fields at quarterback 12. And honestly, that might feel like a little too low. He's one of my most drafted players at the position in early best ball drafts. It might not be rocket science, but rushing quarterbacks continue to be one of the closest things our glorious pastime known as fantasy football is to a cheat code, okay? Running quarterbacks is where it's at. I can't make that simple enough. Now, is Breece Hall running back one season over? The Jets' featured running back doesn't turn 24 until the end of May, which has already happened, and has already managed to put forward some pretty damn good fantasy campaigns. Running back 8 in 2022, running back 6 in 2023. Last year had an off year, but it was running back 17. Of course, the latter season wasn't bad, but as they say, comparison is the theft of joy, right? And as Hall's production, accordingly, wasn't nearly what fantasy managers had in mind when they used a first-round pick on Breece Hall to acquire his services. So what happened to Hall in 2024? Well, and again, I've been a big thing on this. I'm a big thing that Aaron Rodgers changed the fantasy outlook for Breece Hall. But racking up a position high 15 combined fumbles and drops certainly didn't help matters. Nor did career low marks and tackles avoided per carry. Okay, it was not a great season from Breece Hall. It just wasn't. Yet, it's also hard to ignore just how rough of an offensive environment Hall has been forced to operate in, right? His 2022 ACL and meniscus tears were one thing. But this has also been anyone's idea of a brutal setup when it comes to getting reasonable rushing lanes, right? The Jets running back yards per contact, yards before contact per carry, okay? So how many yards is Breece Hall getting before he is touched? 2022 is 1.09. They were ranked 30th. 2023, that went down to 1.07, ranked 23rd. 2024 was 1.08 at 26. Guys, that's been consistent. I don't see that changing. The Jets have made no real, true, scary additions on the offensive line. Okay? Now, obviously, Tyrone, they got to replace Tyron Smith, Morgan Moses, but they're actually in a pretty great position to do so. I think that I think there's still a couple guys out there that are serviceable. Okay, I think they had a chance at the draft. Historically, dual threat quarterbacks like Fields have done a great job evaluating this very metric, seemingly thanks to the gravity in a read option game. Okay, of course, as much as athletic quarterbacks might raise the floor of their team's run game efficiency, but they also tend to factor into the rushing equations near the goal line. They usually scramble more than they check down, right? Ultimately, even an uptick in yards per carry might not be enough to make up for a reduced role if Aaron Glenn if head coach Aaron Glenn can be taken at his word. Okay, Fantasy Life projections still have Hall earning a solid 280 combined carries and targets, which is the eighth highest mark in the league. Now, it's fair to say Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis don't exactly profile as the steepest competition in the world. And the Jets did next to nothing to address the position in free agency or the draft, right? Can Breece Hall be a fantasy draft bargain? The tight end upside and target ceiling that typically go hand in hand with elite fantasy running backs don't seem to be overly on the table for Hall. But that seemed to be more than reflected in his early running back 13 ADP. While I still prefer cheaper backs like Joe Mixon, maybe even a RJ Harvey at cost, thanks to the potential for similar volume and, likely far better overall offenses. Round 4, Hall is a nice piece for rosters that implement wide receiver heavy starts and want a discount bell cow, right? Does that make sense? So you go wide receiver heavy, then you're like, I got to get a running back, but I don't want to wait till round 8 or 9. Breece Hall would be a solid mid-round pick there. I'm not overly interested in either Allen or Davis as late-round draft just due to the reality that we have no idea if either would assume anything close to a workhorse role should Hall miss time with an injury, right? If Hall goes down, I think that turns into a split backfield. This isn't exactly the sort of scoring offense that we should be dying to get exposure in, to have on your fantasy team, guys. It's just not. Do the Jets have any viable wide receiver behind Garrett Wilson? Wilson is just one of 10 players in the Super Bowl era to gain at least 1,000 yards receiving in each of his first 3 seasons of his career. Note that he has reached the mark in each season before getting to the luxury of a 17th game. So this is good company. Of course, the results in fantasy land haven't exactly been phenomenal. Wilson has finished as the wide receiver 30, 32, and most recently wide receiver 20 in points per game. Now, this is a mixture of incompetent quarterback play and the presence of Davante Adams have prevented the 24-year-old talent from really putting forward this sort of elite season-long campaign the Jets envisioned when they selected him with the 10th overall pick, right? So why should 2025 be any different with Fields now under center? Well, for one thing, the rest of this wide receiver room is, just really sad. Like, I honestly get upset looking at this depth chart. Age 30 is Josh Reynolds. He's fresh off of catching 13 passes in 9 games last year. The 29-year-old Allen Lazard was Aaron Rodgers' pick and just led the league in drop rate and, sent perhaps the saddest Wolf of Wall Street I'm not leaving tweet of all time. Nobody cared, Allen. Nobody cared, right? Aaron Rodgers left. He's like, I'm not leaving. Nobody even blinked an eye, bro. Accordingly, Wilson is one of just 8 wide receivers the Fantasy Life projects to clear 140 targets this season. Now, he joins that into being Jahmyr Chase, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Brian Thomas. Brian Thomas seems a little tough for me considering Travis Hunter. But Amon-Ra, Puka, Wilson, and Neighbors. Now, if you notice the list, you are noticing purified wide receiver ones. These are the guys that are going to get the majority of the targets. They are classifying Wilson as one of those this year. Okay, so what is his worth? Is he worth a high draft pick in 2025? Unfortunately, Wilson isn't getting much of a discount in fantasy streets. His current wide receiver 13 ADP is only going around later than where he was at last year. While I'm actually the second highest ranker that I've seen on Wilson, which is mine's wide receiver 15, that's a steep price to pay for any pass catcher who could be operating inside the league's least productive pass game. Okay, I'm okay targeting Wilson in the later stages of round 3, ideally round 4. But heck, even DJ Moore's breakout 2023 campaign with Fields under center produced only a wide receiver 9 finish. Okay, we aren't getting too big of a delta between ADP and that hopeful ceiling, guys. So as for every other player in this, sad excuse for a wide receiver room, I think I'm out. You know what I mean? Garrett Wilson's the only draftable guy there. What are reasonable 2025 rookie year expectations for Mason Taylor? The Jets' second-round pick just turned 21 on May 8th. Yet sure looks like the front runner for immediate starting duties, right? Excuse me. Now, not every starting tight end is created equal around the NFL. It wouldn't be surprising to see Jeremy Ruckert or Stone Smart, some of the other guys that they have, also carve out roles. Again, Jeremy Ruckert's been there a few years, and Stone Smart, I think, was with the Chargers last year. So these are guys that either haven't really seen a lot of field or just got there. Okay. I think the LSU product should at least be considered a solid favorite. Okay. Similar to what, the Wilson, DJ Moore kind of deal is, Fields doesn't have a brief history. He does have a brief history of enabling a fantasy-friendly tight end. Okay, when he was with the Bears, Cole Kmet reached tight end 9 heights in PPR points per game in 2023. Of course, that was year 4 for the Bears tight end, but as players at the position have historically had a rough time getting going in year one, despite some recent booms from guys like Brock Bowers and Laporta. I don't think that Mason Taylor has a Brock Bowers or a Laporta year, but I think it is going to be serviceable. So is Mason Taylor worth a late round draft pick in redraft? I think Taylor is a solid late round dart in best ball land for rosters needing an extra player at the position. Okay, but his redraft value seems awfully thin to be overflowing with excess pass game production, right? We can talk about a waiver wire pickup. We can talk about that after week 1 or week 2, and we see the production. Okay, but more likely a year 1 scenario seems as the 1A in low production, right? All that said, Taylor does profile as a quality mid-round draft pick in Dynasty land. Okay, I like him in Dynasty. 21, just turned 21 years old, guys. Particularly in tight end premium formats where, well, you could either get 2 tight ends or you get an extra point for a catch. Those premium formats for tight ends could really bode well for Mason Taylor. Now, what defense has fielded the best secondary in recent years? Surprise. It's the Jets. Now, the latter stat reflects the reality that it's a team effort between the pass rush and the coverage to produce great pass defense stats like the ones they have posted. But one look at the production allowed is specifically wide receivers gives a pretty good idea as to what position group is especially thriving. Of course, 2022 is consistently the year the Jets drafted Sauce Gardner with the 4th overall pick. That's when their defense really took that next step. Now, while interceptions matter when discussing the very best corners in the game, Gardner just has 3 in 48 career games. But Gardner has been the linchpin behind objectively one of the best pass defenses in the league during the last 3 seasons, and is seemingly awfully likely to become a very rich man in the near future. So what is our prediction for the New York Jets in 2025? Well, you probably don't expect much out of the Jets in real life ahead next season. And get this, neither does Vegas. Overall, they joined the Saints, Browns, Titans, and Giants as the only teams with measly 5.5 win tide totals. Sadly, I'm going to go under on this one, guys. The elite Bills, rising Patriots, and, well, the still competitive Dolphins provide little relief in the AFC East. And there's just too much potential for this offense to sputter in a major way. Okay, that said, my bold fantasy prediction for the year is that Justin Fields will produce his second career top 5 finish thanks to that sweet rushing upside. Again, you heard it here first at the Marshall Experience. Top 5 finish for Justin Fields for the second time in his career.